I'm joined here with Dean Romany, President of Guardian General Insurance Limited of Trinidad and Tobago. And Dean, so it's a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you, Stephen.
Dean, we really have a challenge on our hands, and our climate in this part of the world is really changing. And the Caribbean region is at the tip of the spear with respect to climate change, where we're experiencing more frequent storms and disasters that's causing an impact on climate change. People across the globe are facing daunting new challenges in this area, and in short, we're really in a climate crisis. But the good news is that we're trying to address through this conference these many risks, but also finding a way in which we can protect people, property, drive innovation, and improve risk management systems, and provide better frameworks and business models to drive the insurance industry better as part of the financial sector. So I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions in this area to see how we can find a way to solve this challenge. So let me start with you, Dean, if I can. Can you put into context the impact of climate change on the Caribbean region from an insurance industry perspective?
Stephen, firstly, let me say that you all are doing an amazing job with regard to SW24. I thought it was really, really great in terms of bringing interested folks together to collaborate on this. I believe climate change poses an existential threat to the Caribbean people, to Caribbean insurers, and to reinsurers who provide capacity to insurance companies in the region. Climate change, as you know, it causes the seas to be warmer, and as they expand, the result is higher sea levels, which places greater risks on Caribbean territories and major disasters that happen. Hurricanes, somehow they like warm waters, and because of that, you find they're taller, they're more intense, they're more frequent, and that is that's an amazing threat to the Caribbean. While the Caribbean constitutes a tiny part of global emissions, it is disproportionately more vulnerable to extreme events. And this is what we are talking about. So let's look at the impact of climate change as it pertains to insurance. The first is higher premiums. Year after year, we hear a lot of complaints about every year I have to pay a higher premium. And the reason for that is it is based on higher insurance costs. So reinsurance is something that insurance companies, they have to purchase, which is like wholesale insurance. So they have to purchase this insurance on a wholesale basis to be able to sell it on a retail basis, right? Reinsurers, and not that we are blaming reinsurers, because reinsurers are actually faced with more frequent and more intense hurricanes in the world. And we have to see it as not just what is impacting the Caribbean, but how they're impacted by world events. So if you look at global insured losses from natural catastrophes in 2023, exceeded over 100 billion. In 2022, it exceeded over 100 billion. 2021, over 100 billion. 2020, you get the point. For the last 4 years, it has been over 100 billion US dollars. And the frequency of events is the main driver of this loss accumulation, right? And all fueled by climate change. So what is the resultant impact of this, you'd ask, right? So when premiums go up, and because of significant weather-related events, individuals and companies, they make choices. And ask yourself, right, what's the first choice you'll make? So some people, what they do is that they decide not to buy insurance. And that you'd hear me talking a lot about a protection gap, which is the difference between an economic loss and an insured loss. So when people make that decision not to buy insurance, it increases the gap. And they don't buy insurance because they think it's too expensive. The next is people decide to accept adverse contractual terms. So what they do is they take a higher deductible, which is their contribution of a loss when the loss happens.
Correct.
So again, it's back to their pockets, and that too widens the gap. And some say, okay, I want to insure 20% of this property and only take out insurance for 80%. And again, that too widens the gap. Another decision that people and businesses make is that they don't review their values year after year. And in some cases, you have people insured for like 20 years that they have not reviewed their values. And with inflation and the cost of building materials going up, you find suddenly they are underinsured by, let's say, 50% or even more. So that if you have a loss, then the insurance company would only pay 50% of that loss. Mm-hmm. And again, the gap is widened. And another reason is reinsurers now, having faced with these losses, significant losses in the Caribbean, they then decide, okay, this is no longer economically viable for me. So they come out of territories. So they say, no, I cannot write business in this territory or that territory. And the further up north the chain you go, you find the more frequent and intense the hurricanes are. So they pull out of a territory. And again, that of course widens the gap because people are now not even able to get insurance. So the protection gap and the widening of the protection gap actually, I think is one of the most significant things that is actually impacting the region now. And when that happens, who is responsible for taking care of the gap? Governments. And in some cases, multilaterals, who have significant interests. So this is why this point is so significant. And just to give you an idea of some of the figures, right? In 2023, the economic loss was some $380 billion US. Economic loss. Mm-hmm. The insured loss was $118 billion. So far, and this is some figures from Aon's statistics, they said that the protection gap in the world is something like 69%. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it is 85%. So understand, Stephen, we have a serious issue.
No, absolutely. And you raise very interesting points. The question that I have for you as a follow-up is, given this protection gap and the size of the economic loss that is higher in this region relative to other regions, what are insurance companies doing to assist and provide help to the most vulnerable to continue to be able to access insurance? Because those are the ones that are going to be first impacted in the wake of a disaster.
Excellent point. I think the first is educating vulnerable communities, which is if you let people know these are the loss implications, this is what will happen if you improve your building construction. So you find that resiliency, being resilient is a huge point. And having insurance as an option, because you have some vulnerable communities, they do not have insurance. So showing that insurance is an option is a big point. What the insurance industry has done as well is by introducing, I'll say it's an elementary introduction to insurance. We have introduced micro-insurance products to farmers, fisher folks, low-income, vulnerable communities. So the introduction of that gives them an idea in terms of what can happen, if a loss happens, how they can be compensated. Another big point is like what you're doing here at SW24, collaboration with stakeholders. Let's bring all these stakeholders together. Governments, multilaterals, insurance companies, banks, to say that this is a protection gap and we can do more to actually alleviate or prevent the gap from getting further.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And you preempted my question, which is what are insurance companies doing to provide new products and services to deal with this and mitigate these risks with these respective communities. If I could ask you just one more question.
And I think, Steve, sorry, I think one point that I missed is that, and which I believe is a big point, the UN has a fund called the Loss and Damage Fund for developing countries.
They do.
And I believe in a more proactive, strategic way, perhaps this could be used as a stabilization fund to vulnerable communities.
Absolutely.
And we know we have established that the Caribbean is a low emitter of CO2, but high vulnerability with regard to extreme events, right? I want to say that if we use part of the fund to provide capital or capacity to support exposures in vulnerable communities and reduce the potential burden on governments as the protection gap increases, that could be actually useful. I mean, once this capacity is provided at an affordable level, vulnerable communities can afford to protect their homes using insurance as a means. And perhaps the funds can also be used to assist with funding retrofitting efforts, which is, it's rebuilding your home so you can protect yourself from significant events.
Correct. No, absolutely amazing. And I think if you can elaborate a little bit more on what incentives do you think are needed to be put in place to ensure that there's better resilience within the Caribbean to deal with these current but also future large storms that we will obviously be faced with as we move forward?
I think insurance can play a big part. I think risk-based pricing would be important. So in other words, if we reduce rates or we give discounts on buildings with resilience features, incentives for policyholders who upgrade their properties to reduce loss severity and likelihood, like hurricane straps, for example.
Right.
Hurricane shutters. I think that'll be good. I think insurance companies, if they make it an underwriting requirement to say that that if you want insurance, you must have hurricane straps. That's an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So retrofitting incentives, as mentioned before, would be a big point as well.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that government collaboration with regard to building codes and standards would be very important, and educating the public with regard to the benefits of doing these. And we can use technology to research and to demonstrate the positive impacts of building resilience.
Sure. Dean, I think this has been a wonderful nugget into a very challenging topic. I want to thank you today. Our time may be up today, but I know this is going to be a long conversation to the future where I think between both ourselves and the wider community, we work together to try and solve these issues that are really impacting our lives and livelihoods within this region. So I want to thank you very much for being here today, and I hope we can continue the conversation, not just in this forum, but many other forums throughout the world and throughout the Caribbean as we move forward. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks to the efforts of...
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Best.